bill that commits our state to achieving net zero emissions by 2050 and what it means for municipalities. So I'll turn it over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's great to be here on a Friday afternoon. I'm actually calling in from the Gulf Coast of Texas. And for those of you who've never been down here, this is a landscape dominated by natural gas. So it's really interesting to drive down here and see the refineries all along the coast. It's kind of an interesting reminder of where we are, both politically and culturally. So I am going to go ahead and share my own screen, Betty. Okay. And let me select the appropriate screen. Okay. Presentation mode. Is this slide visible to folks?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Betty. So thank you to Rosemary and other members of the FalCAN steering committee for inviting MCAN to come to your first outreach event. It's really exciting. MCAN is really about people and about mobilizing our climate activists and really, responding to those poll results, which are fascinating. Like 30% basically across the board, except for that small group of folks that just not yet convinced that we can reach net zero, period. So really, really interesting. And so I just want to remind all of us, Earth Day was yesterday. So many organizations are celebrating Earth Week. So many orgs are celebrating Earth Year. And it feels like with a new presidential administration in place, that there is some real momentum happening at the national level. And that momentum really connects and is reinforced by what has been happening in our own state of Massachusetts. And so for those of you that were involved in advocating for this climate bill, the Next Gen Roadmap, that we made it over the finish line, and it's to a big gratitude for all of you that spent basically the past 10 years trying to get climate legislation passed at the state level. And I think it's also really, really important for those of you that listened to Governor Baker and Secretary Theoharides during the sign-in ceremony. Some of their language was really did not necessarily align with some of the provisions, the specific language in the climate bill. And I will talk more about that. And so I really think the next 18 months in Massachusetts, especially for advocates pushing for net zero stretch code, is very, very important. However, first, let's celebrate. We have pretty progressive, robust climate legislation that will become law in June for the first time. And I just want to quickly go over some of the highlights of this incredible piece of legislation, which really serves as a foundation, not only for what we can do at the state level going forward in terms of more coordination between agencies, but also what all of you can do through FalCAN and through other advocacy groups on Cape Cod. So MCAN, we always lead with one of the most progressive, really important outcomes of the climate bill, the Next Gen Roadmap, that environmental justice was a key provision in this bill. And very, very specifically, the bill codifies a definition of environmental justice based on race, income, linguistic isolation, as well as environmental burdens, and that now climate change is included as a particular kind of environmental burden. And this is incredible. This is really, it makes protecting environmental justice communities from the negative consequences of climate change so much more feasible. Moreover, the environmental justice provision of the climate bill expanded the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, otherwise known as MEPA, and it requires MEPA, our MEPA review, to include what is called an environmental impact report for all projects that will change air quality, and especially for those projects within 1 mile of a mapped environmental justice neighborhood. And this is also really, really important. Moreover, the climate bill requires the Department of Environmental Protection to conduct stakeholder processes for developing what is called an analysis of cumulative impact. And so oftentimes residents of environmental justice communities have endured generations and generations of being exposed to polluting facilities. And any new polluting facility proposed sort of has the potential to actually add more and more impact. So the cumulative, that's what that cumulative is referring to. So as part of the DEP permitting process, they now are mandated to do a cumulative impact assessment. And for the first time, DEP is required to evaluate the historic environmental pollution in a community throughout the permitting process. In other words, history matters, and now it really matters in this permitting regulatory process associated with DEP. So in addition, now we have new statewide emissions limits. Massachusetts will now set emission limits every 5 years, and we are required to adopt emissions sublimits in different sectors, including the sector of electric power. Transportation has its own sublimits, commercial, industrial, and then very importantly for all of us who are homeowners, who are developers, who are architects, who are civil engineers, the residential sector in terms of how we heat and how we cool our buildings. So this is really useful. It's a way to help us stay on point. And the way Senator Barrett talked about this bill was that it's really the bill itself is a tool for advocates to use in all of our work to get specifically to net zero emissions by 2050. In addition to making a legally binding net zero emissions by 2050 target, there is a 50% reduction target by 2030 that rejected Governor Baker's proposed 45% reduction. So in other words, the climate bill that the legislators put back to Governor Baker said we need to be more rigorous, we need to be more stringent and more aggressive in setting our emissions reductions targets. Moreover, for the first time, our public utilities, our municipal light plants are now being regulated in terms of their emissions, and they are required to meet emission standards and required to purchase 50% non-emitting electricity by 2030. That is really just around the corner, and then also getting to net zero emissions by 2050. In addition to these statewide emissions sublimits, increasingly politicians, local decision makers are recognizing that building code is a powerful tool to affect change. So many of you on this call probably know that our buildings are depending on where you are, can be the largest emitters of carbon emissions in the state. And so how we direct and require people to build our buildings is really important. And in this climate bill, that MCAN was instrumental in mobilizing so many of you and so many others to really push for something called a net zero stretch code, which I'll talk about in more detail in just a moment. This is an opt-in net zero stretch code. So communities, green communities, communities that are not green communities can opt in by 2022 to a net zero stretch code. Originally, prior to this piece of legislation, the promulgating body for building code for stretch code was a board called the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, the BBRS. This, however, responsibility of developing a net zero stretch code has been taken away from the BBRS and given to the Department of Energy Resources. And I can answer any questions about why that particular change happened. However, DOER is required to work with and to consult with the BBRS. And one way to make sure that the BBRS has sufficient in-house technical understanding of passive house standards, of net zero standards, of energy efficiency and building technology is to actually add more seats to the BBRS for people with expertise in those areas. So there are 4 new seats added to the BBRS. There are new term limits put in place. And one of those new seats includes the commissioner of the Department of Energy Resources, specifically to maintain communication and collaboration. Moving on, there are other components to the climate bill that I'm sure many of you are interested in, especially around the offshore wind utilities now being required to purchase an additional 2,400 megawatts. This builds off of previous legislation that will ultimately result in about 5,600 megawatts of offshore wind from Massachusetts, which is phenomenal. This is wonderful. Moreover, our renewable portfolio standard will now increase 3% annually during the years 2025 and 2029. So again, this climate bill is really trying to transition the Commonwealth away from fossil fuels and towards more renewable energy sources and production. And in a very interesting part of the bill, actually, it says that the Department of Public Utilities must now consider climate considerations in terms of how it balances priorities for the energy sector. So they have to consider in tandem safety, security, reliability, affordability, equity, which is going to be huge as we transition off of fossil fuels more aggressively, and reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So this is incredibly important. So with that, Rosemary had asked me to talk about what can folks in Falmouth and on Cape Cod who are interested in Falmouth, what can local folks do? And one of the most important, my perspective is one of the most important pieces of this climate bill is about the net zero stretch code, singular. Buildings are a problem. They're a big problem, right? They're leaky, they're drafty, our existing ones. And we have to have a better way of building new buildings. New construction needs to be more efficient. It needs to have more feasible pathways to include on-site and or the ability to procure renewables off-site. And all electric buildings need to become the norm. And so a net zero stretch code is probably going to be the hot ticket item over the next 18 months. And I'll tell you why that 18-month time period is so crucial. Before I get into that though, building code, I grew up with an architect father. He's still practicing at 82. Code is really something that I grew up, oddly enough, kind of familiar with. But for many folks, building code, what is that? It's very technical. It's something that doesn't apply to our everyday lives. However, the reality is we occupy buildings. Increasingly, we occupy a place where we both live and work. Hopefully at some point that will transition back to some other kind of workplace environment being separate from our domestic space. However, the point being, building code has a long history in the United States. And in Massachusetts, we have 2 existing building code. We have a base code, which serves as the floor, kind of the minimum efficiency standards that developers and civil engineers work with for new construction. The idea of a stretch code is that it is more stringent. It actually establishes the ceiling beyond which the municipalities in the state of Mass cannot demand anything more from developers, engineers, architects. What has happened in Massachusetts is that we have our base code, we have our stretch code. we have improved our base code so that it has a higher level of energy efficiency demands. So all of a sudden our base code is more stringent in some ways than our existing stretch code. So we have this gap, we have this reversal. So our ceiling right now is lower than our floor. And so we need to really think about how do we improve the stretch code. And MCAN, we worked with Representative Tammy Gouveia, and through our mobilizing of our technical advocates, architects, engineers, building scientists, passive house experts, we developed language that got into the climate bill around the need to develop a net zero stretch code. I want to emphasize, however, going back to that image of Governor Baker, going back to some of the comments that Secretary Theoharides made, they are not talking in terms of net zero. Governor Baker, in his bill signing ceremony, said, I am so excited about a high performance energy code. That is different. A high performance energy code means you can have an incredibly tight building envelope. You can have super efficient appliances, and your building, whether it's commercial or residential, can be completely powered by a fossil fuel. That is a high performance energy code. That's not what MCAN and many of our advocates and many of you on this call really want. So what does the climate bill says? It directs the Department of DOER, Department of Energy Resources, to develop a net zero stretch code that municipalities have the option to adopt by 2022. The BDRS, that former promulgating body, has been very politically conservative, very reticent to explore a very aggressive what they considered an aggressive net zero stretch code. So much of the expertise related to building science, energy efficiency, some of the challenges with how to integrate renewables into net zero buildings, a lot of that technical knowledge already is housed by folks that work within DOER. So that's one of the primary reasons that DOER was directed by the Baker administration to take the lead on developing a net zero stretch code. Now, there is a big fear out among local decision makers, especially those working and serving in green communities. What does that mean for my green community funding? And I just want to emphasize that municipalities that are designated as a green community, you can opt in to the net zero stretch code. And for those green communities that don't opt in, they still maintain their funding. Now, you could have many advocates think this is kind of a weakened approach. I'm not convinced that's the case. I think Massachusetts, like so many places around our country, peer pressure can be very powerful. And there's competition. You know, Falmouth doesn't want to be outdone by Yarmouth, doesn't want to be outdone by Provincetown. So I think this is not as much of a constraint as some folks think. But that does hold the important issue that we need to start working now. We need to start putting together, and this is what MCAN is in the process of, educational resources, a network of experts to go and speak about their direct experiences in terms of how we are already building net zero buildings now. This is really important for the upcoming DOER process. So the climate bill has also required DOER to hold at least 5 hearings in diverse locations, one of them being an environmental justice community. And this outreach process is so much more broader in scope than anything that the BBRS has ever done previously. I do want to emphasize that a net zero stretch code is a way, it's the ceiling, right, that will require new construction to be built to. And I want to briefly review what is a net zero building, because oftentimes there are many different definitions of what a net zero building is. And I always start out with saying a net zero building is a really efficient building. So you're going to have really high rated insulation. You're going to use something called air sealing to plug up the smallest of air exchanges. Your roof is going to be super insulated, and you're going to have a whole range of technology on the inside to really make your energy, to drop your energy use, because those technologies are so energy efficient. So things like air source heat pumps, LED bulbs, double glazed windows, and mechanical ventilation to really make sure, because the building is so tight, that you have a sense of airflow. So it's really about primarily this really efficient structure that also is electrified. So building electrification is really important. And we want to make sure that the energy source for our electricity is clean energy, right? So that it's not a coal plant on the other end, right? So we have energy efficiency, electrification, and really importantly, renewable energy, whether it's a solar array on top of the roof or a combination of producing some renewable energy on site and procuring or buying some renewable energy off-site. So a net zero building produces as much energy as it consumes from clean and renewable sources. There is a net zero building. There are other definitions around energy positive buildings. We can get into that in the Q&A. I do want to position net zero buildings in terms of all of the benefits that they provide, because this is more than just meeting our carbon emissions targets. So if we think about kind of the tip.
Excuse me, Sarah.
Pardon me?
You're on such a great roll. Excuse me. I know this is a really important slide, so I didn't want to interrupt, but like a 2-minute warning?
That's great. Thanks, Mary.
I could.
Second to last slide, no problem. So I want to emphasize all of the benefits. Thanks. I want to emphasize all of the benefits around a net zero building, especially for those folks that have historically lived in very leaky structures, poorly designed, really expensive to heat and cool. So if we think about folks that pay disproportionate amount of their monthly income to utility bills, that cook with gas stoves, and that live in places that are just really uncomfortable, thermally speaking. Those are folks that tend to live in, again, environmental justice communities, gateway city residents. These are the places, these are the people that stand the most to benefit from this kind of new construction, because indoor air is improved, right? We're using induction cook stoves, not gas stoves. We will be creating homes that have very, very low utility bills and if you notice in this list of benefits, I put the emissions towards the end, right? We will be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector. So the bottom line is a net zero building can only really be built statewide across the board in every municipality if we have a net zero stretch code. And the bottom line is this kind of code will create a building, sort of the ceiling above which we can't demand anything else at this point from developers, that is safe, that is affordable, and that has basically over time no emissions. So in this sense, a net zero stretch code is a climate solution because it transforms our buildings from emitters to being non-emitters. My last slide, Rosemary, don't worry. There are action items that folks on this call can take. There's going to be a meeting of the BBRS in May. The date has not yet been announced. However, this is the first time for advocates to really say, we want a true net zero stretch code, not a high performance energy code. beginning in June, this is what I've heard from my colleagues at DOER. DOER will be doing 5 community meetings starting in June. And for the next 18 months, the Net Zero Stretch Code will be in development through DOER. So this is the time for all of you on this call to start working with Falmouth, right? So to start thinking about what can we do in Falmouth right now, working with FalCAN to make sure that Falmouth opts in to the Net Zero Stretch Code. So please do what you can. Please join MCAN, please join FalCAN, and make buildings more efficient, more equitable, and safer for everyone. And with that, my email is at the bottom. I'll drop it into the chat. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. That was very clear on a topic that is hard for people to comprehend. So education is the first step, and we're so delighted that you're here to help us with that. We had a couple questions on the same topic. If we could take one with a short response to keep on track. This is from Bob and Carol Cronin. Does each state have its own base and stretch code? And is there an opportunity for a national or regional stretch code? And someone asked, yeah,
That's
internationally as well. Go ahead.
Yes. So most states have a base code. Not all states have a stretch code. And so if you think, so there are some states in the Western US and in the Midwest, they don't have a stretch code. And there's a really interesting story. There is a national base code that gets updated every 3 years. And MCAN was involved in, and that national base code had a vote last year. And we were able to enroll, I believe it was register over 500 municipal staff folks that were eligible to vote for this national base code. And so Massachusetts had more voters than any other state in the country. And because of that, the national body decided we're not going to vote on the base code anymore because it has been perceived as, because of how Massachusetts folks voted, they made the base code more stringent at the national level. That is what is updating our state's base code. And so the national body said, we're not going to vote on the next update to the national base code. So there's a particular, so this is what I mean by building code becoming perceived more and more as a very powerful response to the development community and to advocates like us that really want to see buildings become more efficient, less emitting. So that, what I call that voter disenfranchisement project means that some states going forward will not be able to, no states going forward will be able to vote on updating the national base code or even thinking about how do we propose a national stretch code. So this is all very, very interesting. It involves a lot of power dynamics. The bottom line is, advocates on this call tonight, this is our moment, this is your moment to work at the real local level to make sure that the net zero stretch code, that ceiling is as high as it can be. And it is a true net zero stretch code. And we don't want, I'm just going to make one more comment, Rosemary, and then I'll be quiet. What I don't want to see, what MCAN doesn't want to see, is that that states around the country that do not yet have a stretch code, that they have the opportunity, let me put that in the affirmative, that they have the opportunity to establish a stretch code. So that is something that MCAN does worry about. We don't want Massachusetts just kind of being the lone wolf leader, or New York, and leaving out Montana, right? This is, again, kind of a collective effort to reduce our global emissions. So building code is very, very powerful. And I really urge you all to get involved at the local level with FalCAN.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we'll go to our next speaker, Jillian Wilson-Martin. She is the Sustainability Coordinator for Natick, Mass, where she's responsible for overseeing her town's reduction of energy use through conservation measures, developing renewable energy options, and educating town employees on the public on sustainability measures. She's here today to share Natick's story of its path to net zero. Jillian's also a very busy mom with young children, so we're not only grateful she's here tonight, but amazed as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Jillian. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Great. Well, thanks everyone for having me, and thanks for spending your Friday early evening here listening to climate conversations. I appreciate that. When I was asked to give this presentation, a couple people were wondering, how does Natick compare to Falmouth? And I wanted to just share this to give you a little bit of background on Natick. I actually have some really good friends who live in Falmouth, and I see a lot of similarities between our communities. One thing I want you to know about Natick is that we're not a mall, just a mall. We do have other things in Natick. I know that that's what we're often known for. We have about 36,000 residents. We're a mix of corporate and residential zoning. And I was trying to just see how we compare to Falmouth, and our tax levy is $121 million in FY22. And I don't think that's so different than where you are at in Falmouth as well. So we're similar communities in a lot of ways. The other thing that we share is that we're both green communities. Natick became a green community at the beginning of the program back in 2010. And since then, we've done a lot of work to not only make our buildings, our municipal buildings and operations and vehicles more efficient and use less energy. We've achieved our 20% reduction energy goal already, but we've also done a lot to create opportunities for clean energy, not only on our municipal buildings and parking lots, but also for our residents through solar programs. And now we're starting to focus more on heat pumps. And at the far end of the slide, you can see a picture of some advocates like yourself at a 2018 town meeting event in Natick, where we were able to pass a non-binding resolution to become a net zero community by 2050. And when we talk about net zero, I know you were talking a lot about net zero stretch code, but when we're talking about net zero for our community, the way that we like to think of it is about balancing the scale. So right now, we know that we're emitting a lot more than we are sequestering in terms of carbon or producing in terms of clean energy. And the goal is really to balance that over time ahead of 2050, if not sooner. So the main thing that I've been working on for the past year, actually more than that, since that 2018 resolution is, to start, I wanted to understand what our emissions were, which I'll talk about in a second, but then also developing a plan on how to address those emissions. And we did that work by doing a lot of community events like you're doing right now and talking with our residents and doing research to inform it. And equity was a really key part of that. And in thinking about equity, we tried hard to think about who's been historically impacted by climate change, who's going to be historically impacted by it, and how are the co-benefits of some of our proposals going to be distributed. And, if you think about that, there are actually a lot of benefits from the work that we're doing in terms of pursuing net zero. And I heard, is it Boris Johnson, the leader of the UK and Britain, he was talking about how they really need to work on climate change. And he said, have cake, eat, because there's so many opportunities in terms of jobs and improving our societies and our infrastructure if we're investing in climate. So we're thinking about that as it relates to equity, because in Natick, for example, a lot of our residents who have single family homes and are not living in low income communities, they've been able to install solar and they're saving money on their electric bills, while our low income communities are actually paying more for their electricity. And so we're trying to find ways that we can distribute those savings throughout the community. So we started by measuring our emissions, and I understand that Falmouth has already done some inventories of your emissions. We have a tool that makes it easy for communities to measure their emissions. As part of our work on our net zero plan, we actually worked with a couple other communities as well as the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is the regional planning agency that Natick is a part of. And we created this tool together that any community in Massachusetts can use to easily update your emissions inventory. And it gives you advice on the data you need to pull and how to get it. And I found it to be really useful. So using that tool, what we found was that 60% of our emissions are coming from our residents, which is really meaningful because it reflects what we should be targeting in our plan. And we also found that most of our emissions are coming from our buildings, like Sarah was talking about. So you'll see that our emissions are coming from the use of electricity, from oil, and from natural gas. There's a lot coming from transportation too, and we can't forget that sector, but buildings are really very important to achieving that net zero goal, especially because we can control our buildings a lot easier. So a few things that we're thinking about in Natick, and this is just pulling from that data that I was sharing from the emissions inventory. We're thinking, how can we switch to carbon-free electricity? Because if we're going to be switching to electric buildings, we don't want the electricity that they're powered by to be coming from natural gas. So right now in Natick, we are able to source already a majority of our electricity from carbon-free sources, and that's because of the work the state has done on renewable energy and the renewable energy portfolio standards, which were actually increased as part of the recent climate legislation. And Natick has an electricity aggregation program, and we require an additional 13% on top of the state's standards to be renewable energy sources. So that's how we're getting to 55% carbon-free electricity right now. And we have a goal of kind of ratcheting that up, just like the RPS is ratcheting up, to get us to 100% carbon-free in 2030. We also are really thinking a lot about how our homes and our buildings are heated. And looking at Natick homes, what we've seen is that our housing stock has a lot of oil heated homes, as well as electric heated homes. And the electric heated homes are unfortunately not the ones that are being heated with very efficient heat pumps, which are available now. They're electric resistance heat, so kind of like heating your home with a toaster. And what we're trying to do is convert these homes to heat pumps, which is an energy efficient way of heating their homes and more cost effective if you're heating your home with oil. And you'll see that we have the net zero stretch code listed here because we know that we want future buildings not to be locking in unnecessary emissions when we know that we can build them to be emission free. Thinking about our vehicles, switching those to electric is a priority of ours. Most of our emissions come from our residents' cars. We're also looking at ways to make walking and biking and telecommuting the best way to get around. And you can see in just what I'm talking about how the strategies that we're starting to explore in Natick really align with what Massachusetts is working on. And I 100% agree there's still a lot of room for Massachusetts to do more and do better and for advocacy work. But I've been really encouraged this year on the steps that our state is taking. So if you think about the strategies the state is leading on, those are really the same strategies you'll hear President Biden talk about. You'll hear pretty much all around the world in terms of these kind of core strategies we need to focus on. The first is about transitioning away from fossil fuels. The second is about being as efficient as possible. The third is decarbonizing our energy supply, and that's really mostly switching to renewable energy and electricity. And then the last is around carbon sequestration. And Natick's strategies align almost exactly with that, but they're very much at a municipal level. So the first column, the yellow and orangey column, are how Natick is focused on where our energy comes from and decarbonizing it. The second column of blue is focused on how we can support our homes and buildings by making them super efficient and electrification. And the third is how we get around. And that's again, electrification and also making zero carbon ways of moving around the best possible choice. So in Natick, what we have right now, and we just actually brought this back to town meeting. It's kind of funny, I was just talking about that. Just last week, we returned to town meeting and we gave them an update and we shared our net zero action plan. And in that plan, it outlines those strategies and it also outlines 21 actions that we as a community are going to be pursuing over the next 5 years. And it's a 5-year plan because we know that between 2020, 2021 now, and 2050, those 30 years, a lot can change. but we think these are the actions that will help set us up for success. And I want to just flag for the folks on this call that in many ways, the actions that you see in Natick's plan are very much like a cut and paste of what you would see in any community's plan. So I think it's important to not get discouraged if you don't have a plan, or if you feel like creating a plan is a really big roadblock, because all of our communities are actually working on the same things. And the MAPC program I was telling you about, they actually, as part of that, we did a lot of research to come up with what actions should be in our plan and what actions every community should be taking. And there's a tool that they have on their website called the Net Zero Playbook. And it gives you guidance on all the different actions that are really available to municipalities and how impactful they are. And you can kind of use that as a guide to kind of just start crafting your own plan. The next thing that we're working on is implementation. And this will be interesting. We'll see how it goes. You know, when I heard Biden's announcement yesterday about the 50% goal, emissions reduction goal for the country, I felt excited, but also very inadequate. You know, we have a lot of work to do on this, and getting these plans done is going to be what really counts. And, you know, I'm getting personally really tired of the planning process and ready to just like get things happening. The last thing I wanted to share with you, I was asked to talk about this specifically, is sustainability on staff. So I used to be kind of a unique person in the municipal world. I'm the sustainability director for the town of Natick. I actually just got a promotion, so that was kind of exciting. But I used to be one of just a few sustainability people in the state, and now I'm one very much of many. So on the right, you have some bubbles showing communities that I know of that have sustainability folks working on staff, on payroll for municipal departments. And I tried to group them by color, showing how big their communities were. And I wanted just you to know that there's a lot of communities that are smaller than Falmouth, with smaller budgets, that have sustainability people working for them. And the things that I'm doing and that my peers are doing in these communities are, we're really managing a ton of projects. There's a lot of funding available in the state for sustainability work, but you're not going to get it if you can't show that you have the capacity to get it done. And you need people on staff to actually lead this work, because it can be really time consuming. We're also doing a lot of integration across departments. I work with every department in our town. I work with the DPW, the planning department, our health department, our assessor's office. I'm really working with everyone on a lot of different things, because sustainability isn't going to work if it's just a silo. It's about incorporating it across our team. And then through that work, we're really delivering a really strong return on investment. Most of the work that I focus on is around energy efficiency and clean energy. And that's where I'm able to really shine in terms of bringing it back a return to the community. But I can share slides with you, but in some years I've had a 12 times return on the cost of hiring me, of having me as an employee in Natick. And that's because of all the funding that I'm able to bring into the community. So it's worth the investment, I think, to have a sustainability person on staff. And we're a great network, always supporting each other, even though we're competing for the same grants. But just something for you guys to think about, another thing for Falmouth to consider advocating for. And with that, I'll stop sharing. And I just want to say thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Jillian. That was really informative. Couple of questions. I think you answered the question full-time. This is a full-time sustainability director?
I could be full-time. I've actually asked to be part-time. So I'm part-time since having my second child, but I am a full-time funded position. And then all of the other sustainability coordinators, with the exception of Sherborne and Holliston on that slide, are full-time positions.
Excellent. David, Leslie, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question of Jillian?
Okay, my question was, how difficult was it and how time consuming was it for you to do the greenhouse gas inventory to begin with, including the residential and the commercial parts of it? And then will you be doing it every 5 years to keep track of, how close you're getting to that goal? 50% or 100%?
Sure. You can do the inventory in less than a day's work with the tool that we have available, because they make all of the data accessible to you. They give you guidance on how to get it, how to download it, and then input it into the tool, which is really just a glorified spreadsheet. I would like to update it on a regular basis. Right now, another advocacy opportunity, the state isn't publishing their data on a regular enough basis with consistency and accuracy to allow us to do that for especially the vehicle census. So we're not able to update it right now, but my hope is in the future we'll be able to update it again, like maybe every 2 or 3 years.
Excellent, thank you. So next, I'd like to introduce Megan Amsler. Many of you know Megan already as Falmouth's Energy Committee Chair. Since 2001, Megan has been the Executive Director of Reliance, a nonprofit women-led organization whose mission is to simplify complex energy issues to educate, inspire, and empower people to take action. We asked Megan to come today to give us an update on where Falmouth is with our new green community status and a lay of the land on the opportunities and the challenges for Falmouth. I'll turn it over to you, Megan. Megan, I'm not hearing. Megan, are you unmuted?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself once I shared my screen. Okay, thank you, Rosemary.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna whip through some slides here and talk a little bit about what Falmouth has done, and just thought this was an appropriate first slide, given the fact that we have come back to the Paris Accord. This next slide here, just want to sort of contextualize some of the thoughts around how we think about what Falmouth should do in terms of net zero, zero carbon, carbon negative, climate positive. There's so many different terms floating around out there. And I really appreciate both Sarah and Jillian's contextualization of policy and where different terms like these net zero, zero carbon, and carbon positive and carbon negative come into play from a policy perspective. And I think it's really important that we think about and have lots of good discussion about how do we decide where we want to go as a community. How do we get there? What are the tangible tools that we can each as individuals, business owners, homeowners, and sort of citizens on this planet take to get there? Obviously understanding that we are all energy consumers and therefore we all are responsible for this mess that we have made from a climate perspective. And I know that we all need to work on this, and I really want to help and be part of this group of solution based action takers to help people understand more clearly the actions that they can take today to get them started on this path. That being said, I think it's also important to think about from a decarbonization transition perspective, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot, because as we're talking, and Jillian just was talking more specifically about replacing oil-fired boilers and furnaces and hot water heating equipment and all of this sort of transition over to electrification, electric vehicles, all of that sort of thing, we need to make sure that this energy is coming from renewable sources. And this is a really interesting report that came out from the Brattle Group. I encourage people who are interested in digging into some of this to sink your teeth into this report, because it's full of really, really good information. But this slide, this little bar chart here really does help illuminate, we have offshore wind coming and really excited about that, but it's also looking at solar, right? The orange part of the bar is the solar, and that's where we really need to go. That coupled with storage, right? All of these technologies coupled with storage as we decarbonize is absolutely essential. And so what does that mean for us as homeowners or business owners, as the municipality? All of these things are really, really relevant tools. I'm going to give a quick overview of what we have been up to in Falmouth. We have a long history. I was super excited to see Jillian put up that they're part of ICLEI. They joined ICLEI. We joined ICLEI also back in 2002. We started the Energy Committee in 2001. We did our initial energy benchmark in 2002, wrote an energy action and climate protection action plan in 2004. We have done multiple energy benchmarks to sort of check and see how are we doing. And I'll show you a graphic about that in a minute. We've done a bunch of renewable energy installations over the course of a number of years. And that includes everything from PV, wind to solar hot water on the roof of Gus Canty. And we did have an energy coordinator for a number of years. And we have an electric vehicle charger that is installed in our marine park. Photograph of the fellow in the middle here was one of the people that I actually found that was utilizing it. So we've also done a lot to our buildings and to our lighting, because shockingly, that's very energy intensive. So we have LED traffic signals. We've retrofitted our streetlights to LEDs. We did an ESCO energy services contract program there throughout the schools and other municipal buildings where we did over 40 projects. Recently, in 2020, we purchased electric vehicles for the town fleet, for part of the town fleet, and we also passed a climate emergency. We did pass the stretch code in 2019, and we finally became designated as a green community just recently in 2021. So we have a lot of really exciting stuff going on. Here's a snapshot of, this is just municipal emissions, but I do want to point out, so you can see this is going back to 2010. This is through the Mass Energy Insight software. But in 2010 and in 2021, the two outliers on this chart, we are missing the gasoline and diesel data, just so that you make notation of that, and of the oil. And that was also the case in 2017 when the report was done as well. But you can see it's overall heading in the right direction. And that's a good thing based on the amount of efficiency, the investment that we as a municipality have made in energy management systems, new equipment for efficiency and conservation. And that's a good thing to see. Here's just a really good streetlight synopsis that sort of gives you this snapshot. So you can see how much we were utilizing, and then after, when we did the upgrade to LEDs, we dropped down substantially. So that's really a good thing to see. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the work that I do through Self-Reliance for the larger energy users in our community. We do energy benchmarking programs. We use the EPA Portfolio Manager for large energy users. So we do it consistently for the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. We've done it for Falmouth Academy. We've done it for NOAA. If there are other large energy users that are out there, we did it for the tribe. They're not necessarily, their facility is over in Mashpee, but, and we did it for Mass Maritime. So we do it for entities that are large energy users outside of Falmouth, and we leverage the Mass Clean Energy Center's summer intern program to help with doing those things. So it acts as a great project, and it enables these institutions who frankly don't have time to just charge somebody with doing this data collection, and then we work together on coming up with an energy and climate action plan together. And I should also add, the Sea Education Association was one of the more recent ones that we did. And I think what is really interesting and informative and helpful from collecting this data, this is from WHOI, is that you can see the Losos building, that's a LEED building. And through the collection of the data, we were able to determine that something was not working really well here. And it turned out that it was an HVAC building issue. And by solving that, it saved them $40,000. And so it increased the air quality and the building performance. We were able to document all that, and it helped bring down the energy costs and associated greenhouse gas emissions and make people more comfortable working and visiting in the building. So just advocating for those kinds of things, I think is really, really important. From the homeowner perspective, this just sort of goes back to what Sarah was talking about, and Jillian as well. Good insulation, making sure we have good air sealing, safe or no combustion. If you have ductwork, make sure it's clean, it can get cleaned, and mechanical ventilation, right? Because we don't want things to be too tight and to have poor air quality inside. We need to make sure that we have healthy and comfortable space that we are living and working in, which also saves money, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that's super important. Just wanted to put out some things that we can invest in that I think are really important. We have the Cape Light Compact. Everyone can take advantage of their energy assessment on an annual basis. Air sealing, insulation, great place to start. Think about fuel switching. Really a huge advocate for air source heat pumps for domestic hot water, and for space heating and cooling. Thinking about solar, and if you have questions about that, definitely here to help with that kind of thing. I spend a lot of my time helping people make informed decisions about this. Think about community shared solar. If you are not in a place, maybe you're a renter, maybe you live in an area where there's lots of trees and it's just not appropriate to put solar on your property. Think about Energy Star purchases. Think about ways to sequester atmospheric carbon back into the soil and improve our native landscapes. Can't tell you the amount of leaf blowers that I hear on a regular basis year round now. Those leaves help keep the carbon in the soil. So little things like that. There's lots of webinars out there. There's videos. There's all kinds of there's great books to read on what we can do as individuals to help put the carbon back into the soil. Think about electric vehicles, energy management systems within your home. Be mindful, right? Turn the lights off. Make sure that you don't stand there with the refrigerator door open. Think about ways to reduce your runoff and how you're fertilizing your lawn and your garden. And think about how you can vote with your dollars, right? Regeneratively sourced and recycled content products are really things that need to be on the forefront of our minds. So that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan. Does anyone have any questions for Megan? Let's see. David, Leslie, would you like to unmute yourself and
I've
ask
lost
your
my
question?
mouse.
Okay, actually a more relevant question than the one I posted was, do you know of any ground source heat pump installations that are being done on Cape Cod? I'm not sure that the geology is appropriate for it. But the question that I posted there was, maybe anybody can answer this. Do we expect any increased contribution of energy from onshore wind? We know Falmouth's history in that, which is not too good, but also from hydro. Offshore is growing and solar is growing, but I'd like to know if those other sources are also going to contribute to Massachusetts' budget.
Those are very good questions. And I will say I do know of some ground source heat pumps that are installed relatively recently in Falmouth. That being said, they are incredibly energy intensive. And so unless you're going to do some sort of on-site renewables, it is not necessarily the best way to go given what we have here. But I will say that going with the air source heat pumps is far more efficient, and also making sure that you have on-site renewables to help with that, to help offset that. And then on the wind side, I don't have an answer for that. I think I think overall, if you look at where the growth in renewables are happening in this state, it is in the offshore wind sector, and it is on the large scale and residential solar.
Great. Thank you. I see Rudolph has your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I have a question regarding the Mayflower Wind Project. My understanding is that the electricity comes underground in the Falmouth along the Falmouth coastline, and it's currently not quite sure where it is. And then from there, it will go via wires to meet the grid. And I was wondering, can one ask the company to install solar panels in these areas that are clear cut for above ground wires? There's so much land used clear cut for nothing else really than for keeping the wires safe, and that's all right. But can it be maybe combined with solar panels that produce electricity just like the wind turbines?
Yes, I do. I have heard
uh,
of the of people talking about putting solar on the easements that Eversource has for the power lines and that sort of thing. So it's absolutely something that, you know, that's out there. I haven't seen any of that happen, though. That being said,
yeah, it might be that where solar panels are, the wires have to be maybe not very deep, but have to be underground. And so it for a new project like this Mayflower Wind project, maybe one could incorporate that right away into the design and even into the permitting process.
good point. Thank you.
It sounds like, yeah, sounds like a really innovative solution. So that's the type of thing that we're building community for, to get our ideas out and, you know, try to work towards the world that we want. So thank you for that. Betty, I'd like to go to the last of the, oh, and thank you very much, Megan, for that. Did you have
sure.
something else you wanted to say before we moved ahead?
Hi,
Okay.
Rosemary. I just wanted to say, hi, I'm Kelsey Perry. I'm the Community Liaison Officer for the Mayflower Wind Project. Thank you for putting on this great event. It's amazing to hear all of Falmouth's, you know, all of your great ideas, actionable next steps. Rudolph, thank you for that comment. And I did receive your email a few weeks ago about that idea. We love hearing feedback like that. And, you know, we want to, any land that we're utilizing for this project, I mean, we want to return it the same or better than it was. So, you know, feedback like that really helps us in the development process, and ideas like that are possible as the technology improves. So I will definitely keep that in mind and speak about it with my team.
Great, thank you. Thank you for being here, Kelsey, by the way. Okay, so Betty, could you, I'd like to get to the last slides. So I haven't been paying attention about sharing screen. So should I share my screen and go with it, or can I have you, I'll just say next slide. Okay, so we promised that we would have, we've had many great action items already discussed, but we still have some more. One important thing you can do this weekend with a very hard deadline, April 30th, is to fill out the Falmouth Planning Board survey at www.davisstraits.com. If you're not familiar with the Davis Straits proposed development for Falmouth, you can get educated all about it there. And this is our opportunity to respond to their survey and give our input on the kinds of community that we want Falmouth to be. So that's one thing that I hope everybody, if you do one thing, you do that this weekend, and just bring yourself up to speed on that. write a letter to the editor about the climate emergency. We've had, all these wonderful Earth Day events, all this new information about what we can do locally. Process it and submit a letter to the Falmouth Enterprise. Plant something, particularly food. Get inspired by the film A Life on Our Planet, David Attenborough. I personally haven't seen it yet, but I want to do it. Everyone I meet who's seen it just says it's so important. Next slide, please, Betty. Okay. Yes, and take up Sarah's suggestions to offer comments in support of net zero at the May 2021 BBRS hearing. We have her contact information now. We'll be in communication and share her updates and advocacy ideas. Submit comments during DOER community meetings. We know that when the public shows up at community meetings, we can make a difference. Next slide. Okay, volunteer with a CAN group in your town. And we at 350 Cape Cod, there is a list of CAN groups that have formed with contact information. We'll be sending more information about that from FalCAN as well. Work to adopt the net zero stretch code resolution at your town meeting. Make your next car an EV. FalCAN will be hosting another electric vehicle car show. The Energy Committee and Upper Cape Women's Coalition did it last year, and it was really fun and worthwhile. Follow us on Facebook and email us if you have any questions, falmouthcan@gmail.com. So just to conclude our formal presentation, I looked for an inspirational quote, and Jane Goodall has always said it perfectly. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. So I know. So thank you all for being here. I promised our speakers that we'd be wrapped up at 6:15, and we're right there. So thank you again for making this time on a Friday evening and sharing such great presentations and information. And we look forward to speaking with you again. We'll stay on the call, but round of applause for our speakers, and thanks and gratitude. All right. Thank you. So Betty, should we go to the second poll?
Sure.
Okay, good.
For those of you staying, we can do another poll.
Yes, we can stay for 15, 30 minutes if people just want to hash out ideas and have a, discussion about climate actions in Falmouth. But we have one more little survey to do. So please select the top 3 ways Falmouth or your town can achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So you have to read the whole list before you start voting. We'll give about a minute.
For me, I can only click on one at a time. Is that true for everybody else?
Yeah, I'm getting that message from others too. So, okay, we're going to have to just look at this poll as,
Okay.
What's your top? I think that'll give us
Yeah.
the
We can
information.
talk
we
through
need.
it. I'm
Great.
assuming most people cannot see this result coming in. That's only the hosts, I'm guessing. They can vote. But what we have right now, people are pouring in with 60% of the votes are in. And most say make our homes and commercial buildings more efficient and expand on-site solar and solar farms. If anybody would rather use their voice to say what a good way to
That's a great idea.
achieve
Betty.
net zero emissions by 2050 is, you can go ahead and come off mute and just talk. I'll leave this up for a few minutes because people are still responding.
I would like more discussion in the future about wastewater. It's a big expense and a big waste. Energy expense and a resource waste.
Hilda, just for others on the call, could you just introduce yourself and Earl and, just briefly? Yeah, thank you.
My name is Hilda Menge. My husband is Earl Barnhart, and we have the nonprofit, the Green Center. And it's an extension of New Alchemy Research Institute that has done research basically in all parts of sustainability for the last 50 years.
It's just an amazing place to visit, and I've been there many times with Hilda and Earl, and enjoyed their hospitality and education. So if you get a chance to visit them, you will be amazed.
What's the name
They'll
again?
probably have an open house someday when it is a little bit safer than it is now.
Absolutely, right. I didn't mean to invite a group of people to.
We got a
have
lot
drink,
of requests recently, so it's nice that it's in the forefront of people's minds now.
Mhm.
What's the current name? Of
The
group?
Green Center.
So that's what the New Alchemy used to be?
Yeah.
Great.
So I'll go ahead and
Okay.
share the poll results just so we have that
Thank you,
complete.
Betty. That's great.
So there you can see.
Okay.
I'll let you lead the discussion, Rosemary.
Yeah, all right, thanks. So the clear winner with 56% is make our homes and commercial buildings more efficient. And that's good news because that's something that we can do, and FalCAN volunteers can play a big role in getting our homes, get the Cape Light Compact, Mass Save audits, get our neighbors to do it. Again, do public outreach and education. And that's something that FalCAN will be doing, very deliberately. Megan Amsler did not mention Cape Energized. She had so much information, but we will be, Cape Light Compact and the CAN groups will be organizing an Energize program, much like the Outer Cape Energize program, which was very successful and put solar on many, many roofs and saved a lot of energy and a lot of money for their clients. So that will be rolled out next year. But in the meantime, we can do our own education and outreach. So the number two winner, 31%, was expands on-site solar generation and solar farms. So Falmouth has a proposal at town meeting. I don't want to, that's a whole different discussion, but we have we're at a point where we have to make decisions about our solar, where it will be sited and so on. And it's a conversation that this group is thinking very hard about, having and thinking very hard about. So invite you on the conversation. And the other, at 6%, we have conserved existing forested lands, grasslands, and wetlands, which we know are, the carbon sequestration tools that are actually working right now without having to do anything. So, so that's basically it for our survey. Okay. Thank you, Betty, for that. Does anybody have any questions about plans for FalCAN, suggestions, or if you're in another town, what are you doing? What's your CAN group doing? My husband read to me an article about Chatham CAN today, and I think it was in the Enterprise. So they're doing great stuff too. So the floor to anyone from out of town.
I have a comment.
Sure, go ahead, Hilda.
There's no way that we can have enough alternative energy if we don't stop wasting. So that's why I put the buildings on the top, because there's no way that we can have enough solar power installed in time if we don't stop wasting our energy. And that is everybody's personal effort to work on that. Just plug up your leaks in your building. It doesn't always have to cost a lot of money, but you can start simple. And that is not really in the forefront of the low-hanging fruit that we should be working on individually. And just thinking about which trip you make to town before you buy anything. Do you really need to go? Can you wait a couple of days and combine things? So all that stuff is just basic kind of awareness when you live of not wasting energy, because we can't make up for it. We can't live this way and get sustainability by 2050 or zero in time.
Good point.
We can't keep
So-
flying to and taking trips and all that stuff. It's just not possible for the whole world to live that way.
There was a question in the chat from Nanette Oldenburg, who asked what would have been the best answer to our survey, and then she added that Hilda just answered it. So thank you for that. So is there one more question from someone who hasn't spoken yet? Stephen. Hello. Unmute, Stephen.
I got it. I wasn't unmuted. No, I just had a question for the remaining group, whether or not Friday night is the best time to have this event, because we'd like to have it on a regular basis. We had a pretty, what is it? We had almost 40 people turn out. I don't know how many registered, but just thought for those of you who remain on, if you had an opinion, would be nice to know. No opinions?
That's a question on my mind too, Stephen. We're going to send a survey after this
That'll be
event, and we'll ask that question.
Yeah.
And appreciate all your input, program ideas, etc. So
We're gonna have
I
to
think
look.
that's it, unless anyone has any other questions, comments. I think we should get our
Jan?
weekend.
Oh, I
Oh,
just
hi,
wanted to thank you
Oh, thank you for being
for
here.
this. This was really, it was really wonderful. I don't have a lot to offer what we're doing here. I'm a Citizens Climate Lobby member, and when things are going great there with it just seems like the membership keeps growing and things are happening in Congress. That the bill that we advocate for, the Energy Innovation Act, has been reintroduced in the House. So it's always promising that maybe this time it'll happen.
Wonderful. Good work. Thank you. All right, people. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We're really excited to do more of these. We'll find the right time and format, and stay tuned. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Betty, for your technical work, and David for helping put together our program, and everyone else. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks Rosemary and David. You guys did a ton of work on this and it was really great. Fantastic speakers. I think maybe all have checked out by now, but
yeah,
it was wonderful.
Thank
That's
you.
very good. Very
Coming
good.
from you, that's a huge compliment. Yeah. Okay. Good night, everybody. Have a great night.
All right. Thank
And
you.
happy- Okay. Bye.